Every piece of land on the frontier is haunted. Sam Ward's land was haunted by the ghost of a wife and an unmarked grave. The Comanche land was haunted by broken treaties and promises turned to ash. For years, those two ghosts had lived in a quiet truce, separated by a prairie of snow. Until the night a fleeing girl crossed that invisible line, dragging a blood debt behind her and turning Sam's quiet cabin into the place where two worlds would come to war. 45 winters had etched themselves deep into Sam Ward, and this one seemed to stretch longer than all the rest. Grief had its own gravity, and his shoulders had stooped beneath that burden since the day he laid his wife in the earth, beneath a willow that always bent toward the creek as if it, too, carried an unspeakable sorrow. Since then, silence had become the sole occupant of the log cabin, not because he could not speak, but because there was no one left worth speaking to. The space around him bore the shape of her memory. A comb carved from bone still lay on a dusty windowsill. Jars of dried herbs, arranged by her hand, stood untouched on a shelf. He slept on only one side of the bed. The other half had long gone cold. There had been a daughter once, a life that had never drawn its first breath. After that loss, Sam stopped building cradles. He built fences, mended saddles, and kept his solitude to himself. The people in town whispered about the quiet man who rode in once a month and only spoke when coin changed hands. That night, as the sky turned the deep color of an old bruise, a strange sound reached his ears, not the voice of the wind. It was faint, halting. He thought at first it might be a wounded coyote, but when he stepped outside, the shotgun in his hand a reflex of habit more than an intention, he saw her. She lay there, beneath the cedar by the barn, her body folded as if the cold itself had carved her from ice. The dress was torn at the sleeve, and a dark patch spread out, staining the white snow red. She was young, as still as a deer he had once hunted in the lean years. For a long moment, Sam just stared like a man confronting something he cannot believe is real. Then he lowered the gun. He did not ask who she was. He did not ask where she came from. He simply lifted her with careful arms, as if afraid a single rough touch might cause her to fall apart. She was lighter than sorrow and carried the scent of river water mixed with smoke. As he crossed the threshold of the cabin, it felt as though he were carrying a fragile disturbance into his quiet world. He laid her near the hearth and covered her with the only blanket not steeped in memory. She stirred faintly, her chapped lips murmuring in a language he did not understand but could feel in his bones. Comanche, perhaps. It had been years since he had seen any of their people on this land. He brought a basin of warm water and carefully cleaned the blood away. There was a gash on her arm, deep but not fatal. He stitched it with the quiet skill of a man who had once done this for a living. Before the war, before the farm. She watched him through half-lidded eyes, flinching only once when the needle met her flesh. He said nothing. She said nothing back. When dawn broke, she was awake before the sun, sitting upright with the wariness of a hunted animal. Sam had left a piece of cornbread and some dried meat on a plate beside her. She reached for it, quick and cautious. He sat at the table, drinking coffee, not staring but not ignoring her either. When her eyes met his, there was no demand, no plea, only a silent truce between strangers. "You're safe," his voice was hoarse from disuse. "For now, at least." She did not answer, but she did not run. The snow kept falling, a white and dense curtain, burying the world in silence. Sam went about his daily chores, feeding the livestock, breaking the ice in the water trough, checking the fences. He worked slowly, methodically, as if the order of familiar tasks could keep his inner world from collapsing. When he returned, he saw that she had swept the ash from the hearth and neatly arranged the blankets. She glanced toward the cupboards that held his dry goods, and Sam could read the hunger in her eyes. A silent language etched deeply onto her face. That night, He cooked a thick stew with beans, salt pork, and wild onion. She ate slowly, her movements almost ceremonial. He noticed she chewed on only one side of her mouth and suspected a bruise was hidden beneath her dark hair. He did not ask who had done it. She did not tell. The storm howled more fiercely that night, the wind crying like a grieving creature. Sam added more wood to the fire and gave her the bed. He told himself it wasn't kindness, just practicality. The bed was warmer. She needed to heal. That was all. In the middle of the night, he woke to find her standing at the window, her silhouette sharp against the firelight. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for something or someone. He rose slowly. "Are you expecting trouble?" She turned and, this time, she truly looked at him. A long silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then she nodded once. Sam had known trouble in many forms: war, hunger, loss. But this was different. This was not his trouble, yet somehow it had already found a home in his life. Dawn broke through the shutters, pale and weak. Sam stepped outside to feed the horses. He hadn't seen any new tracks for weeks, but this morning his breath caught in his throat. Hoofprints had been etched deep into the snow's face, an imperfect and threatening circle surrounding the house. He looked up at the ridge and saw them, riders perhaps several dozen, their faces painted, their spears glinting in the morning sun. Comanche. Sam single quotes, S chest tightened, not with fear, but with a cold clarity. He turned slowly back to the house. Inside she was standing near the fire, her eyes wide but not surprised. He said nothing, neither did she. And in that stillness, something passed between them. An understanding that neither of them was safe, but that neither would run. Not anymore. The leader wore a cloak of bison hide, his shoulders broad and steady. On his face were streaks of black paint, drawn like the furrows of years and authority. He stopped a dozen yards from the cabin, and the others formed a wide line behind him, a silent wall of men and horse. Before Sam could speak, the girl stepped forward. "Father," she said, her voice needing no volume to command attention. The man on the horse did not reply. His gaze passed over his daughter, then settled on Sam. Sam remained still, his hands loose at his sides. He just watched, trying to understand. What this father saw: a white man with a broken spirit and a house full of ghosts, standing beside his only living child. The silence stretched long enough for the wind to return. Then the father spoke, his voice deep and formal. "You have sheltered her." It was not a question. Sam gave a slow nod. The chief dismounted, the snow creaking beneath his boots. He walked forward with a calm authority, the way men walk into battle or into prayer. When he stopped, he was only a few paces from Sam, close enough to see the lines of sleeplessness on each other's faces. The girl stepped between them. "She crossed the border of death," he said to Sam, "and you gave her back her breath." "I gave her nothing," Sam answered. "She took it back herself." The father's gaze lingered on Sam for a long moment, something shifting, not softening, but recalibrating. He turned to his daughter. "You are no longer a child," he said, "but I still wish to decide for you." "I did not run from you," she replied, her voice holding a certainty that needed no embellishment. "I ran from those who took more than they had a right to." That statement hung in the air. The chief turned back to Sam. "My warriors will not strike today, but they may return, and not in peace. You have 3 days. After that, I will come, not as a father, but as a chief." He mounted his horse in a single fluid motion. The circle of warriors turned with him, their horses moving like a tide pulled by an unseen moon. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving only churned snow and the fading thud of hooves behind. The fire in the hearth had nearly died, leaving the cabin colder than the air outside. Sam tossed another log on, the sparks jumping like startled creatures. He turned to look at the girl, her face unreadable in the flickering light. "You should Go with them, Sam said, his voice holding no command. She looked up. To return to what? To silence? To marry a man who sees me only as a name on a treaty. She added, almost in a whisper, you gave me a room that did not lock. That was enough. He turned back to the fire, not because it needed tending, but because he could not look at her for too long. 3 days. He counted them like grains of sand in an hourglass, each one a chance to lose her or to keep her. The first day passed in a changed silence. It was no longer empty, but seemed to be listening. Sam saw her standing for a long time by the window, looking toward the willow tree where he had buried his wife. That afternoon, when he returned from checking his traps, he found Marjorie's old shawl folded neatly and placed at the foot of the bed, a silent act of respect. She had taken a different blanket for herself. He began to watch her more, not with desire, but with a restless curiosity. There was a stillness about her, but it was not emptiness. It was shaped by someone who had been forced to listen long before she was ever allowed to speak. One morning, he found her crouched near the coop, offering a crumb of biscuit to the hen that usually pecked his own hand raw. The bird ate gently from her palm. On the second day, he had to ride to town for salt and flour. Mrs. Albright, the bird ate gently from her palm. On the second day, he had to ride to town for salt and flour. Mrs. Albright, the bird ate gently from her power. General store owner eyed him with suspicion when he also bought tea and a bolt of dark blue cotton fabric. Got company, Sam? She asked, her tone sharper than the words. Just someone passing through, he replied, his voice even. Passers-by aren't always good company, she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. A Comanche girl. They have a way of making even quiet men wild. Sam simply paid and left. That night, he placed the bolt of fabric on the table without a word. She looked at it for a long time before reaching out, her fingers just barely brushing its smooth surface. She said nothing, but her eyes held something. Close to gratitude. The next morning, he found her sitting by the window, stitching the fabric into a new tunic with a needle and thread. The sunlight glinted off the needle. She looked calm, but her eyes occasionally flicked toward the ridge. You think they'll be back before tomorrow? Sam asked. She nodded. They will not wait. That afternoon, they worked beside each other in the yard. He showed her how to braid strips of rawhide into a set of reins strong enough to hold a bolting horse. She showed him a different kind of knot, the kind used to bind sinew to an arrow shaft. They worked in silence, only the wind moving between them, scattering bits of hay. It felt like they were building something. It felt like a language. That evening, the final evening, the storm returned, but not with snow. Only wind and dust and a sky full of restless clouds. They sat by the fire, so close their knees almost touched, and then he told her, finally, about his infant daughter, about the small grave beneath the willow, and about how he could not bring himself to name her. Because to name something is to believe it had lived. She said nothing. She simply reached out and took his calloused hand in hers. Her fingers were rougher than Marjorie's had been, but warmer and stronger. I think she lived, she said. Even if only in your dreams. He couldn't answer. He just held her hand. The air in the room was thick with waiting. In the dark, he whispered. What is your name, Nahili? He tasted the name, let it settle on his tongue. Nahili. She drew in a slow breath, as if she had not heard it spoken in years. Outside, the wind shifted, and the final dawn, was waiting just beyond the edge of sleep. The dawn came without color. A sky the color of ash stretched thin. The land had changed overnight. It no longer felt quiet, but like a drum skin stretched too tight, ready to snap. There was no need to guess anymore. The Comanche would return. Today. Inside, Nahili moved with slow precision. She braided her hair tightly and checked the stitching on the bandage on her arm. She dressed not as a girl waiting to be rescued, but as someone bracing for what was to come, whatever form it took. Sam made coffee, though his hand trembled just enough to spill a few drops. They sat opposite each other at the table for a time. Two people surrounded by quiet, trying to memorize the stillness before it vanished. "They will assume you took me," Nahili said first. "Then we'll tell them the truth. They will not listen." Sam looked down at his calloused hands. "Then we will. Make them listen." The first thunder did not come from the sky. It came from the earth. This time, the horses did not form a circle. They formed a line across the field, a wall of riders wearing war paint in silence. At the center was Chief Navo, his bison hide cloak on his shoulders, his expression now etched with resolve. His gaze found Nahili the moment she stepped outside. She did not hide behind Sam. She stood beside him, her eyes steady, her spine straight. Navo raised a hand, and the warriors behind him dismounted as one. Still no weapons were drawn, but the weight of intention hung in the air, as thick as the storm clouds above. "Your days are over," Navo said. "Now she returns." "She is not property," Sam replied, his voice low and firm. "She is daughter," Navo answered. "That is not ownership. It is bond, and when a bond is broken, something dies." Nahili stepped forward. Her voice was steady, each word deliberate. "Then let it die." If it was built on silence. A quiet murmur rippled through the warriors. Navo came closer, his eyes burning into his daughter's. "You speak like one who has forgotten her blood." "I speak like one who has seen what happens when blood is the only thing that binds," she countered. Navo's gaze shifted to Sam, and for a long moment, the father and the widower stood in that unspoken crossing once more. No man raised his voice. No man moved. "You took her," Navo said. "I opened a door," Sam answered. "She walked through it. You love her." The words settled in the space between the wind and the silence. Sam looked at Nahili, then back to the father. "I have lost everything I have ever loved. But I would still not ask her to stay unless she wanted to." Navo tilted his face slightly, as if listening to something else beneath the words. Then slowly, he unhooked a knife from his belt, an old ceremonial blade etched with weathered patterns. He stepped forward and held it out, not as a threat, but as an offering. "A man does not win a daughter," he said. "He proves whether he will break under her weight, or carry it with honor." Sam looked at the knife but did not take it. Navo continued. "We have a ritual. You will hunt with me, one deer, one path. If you walk that path without flinching, I will know what kind of man you are." Sam said nothing for a moment. Then he nodded once. They rode out together, the chief and the rancher, into the low hills where the sagebrush grew thick. The deer they found was neither old nor young, a buck with wide eyes and keen ears. Navo gestured to Sam, offering him the chance. Sam took the bow, moving through the brush the way he had in the war. He did not rush. When he loosed the string, the arrow flew true, striking just behind the shoulder. A clean and certain shot. They brought the deer back as the rain finally began to fall. Not hard but steady, as if something long held back had been released. Navo dismounted and stood before Sam again. "You do not speak our language," he said. "You do not know our words. But your actions speak what your mouth does not." Then, without ceremony, he turned to Nahili. "You are no longer of my fire," he said, "but you are never gone from my heart." He touched her forehead with 2 fingers, then turned and walked to his horse. The warriors mounted. No battle came. No blood was spilled. Only departure and the rain dot as the sound of hooves faded into the horizon. Sam and Nahili stood alone in the quiet. The storm no longer howled, it wept. They entered the cabin in silence. The fire hissed where the logs were damp, but the warmth held. She came to him, her hands bare, her eyes raw. "You did not flinch," she said. "I didn't know I had the choice. I was ready to let you go." I would have let you go too, she replied. She stepped closer, and he let her. There was no trembling now, no held breath. I want to stay, she said. He reached out, touched her cheek. Her skin was damp from the rain, but warm. Then stay, he said, as if there was nothing else in the world more simple or more sacred. And in that moment, the storm passed. The sun rose slow and honey-gold, warming the frost that clung to the tall prairie grass. For the first time in weeks, the sky was clear and blue, as wide as a breath long held and finally released. The storm was over, not only in the sky, but between them. Sam Ward stood by the barn, his posture changed. No longer a man weighed down, but like a tree that had sunk its roots deep into the earth. Behind him, the cabin no longer looked like a tomb. Smoke rose from the chimney in a steady, clean ribbon. Inside, Nahili moved through the morning light. There was no fear left in her hands. She wore the new tunic made from the blue cloth. It seemed straight and strong. She had become a part of this place, not as a guest, but as a river that has found its bed. Sam came inside and picked up a small object he had left on the table. It was a necklace of 3 carved bone beads on a leather thong, the kind his own mother had worn when he was a child. He placed it carefully where Nahili would find it. A gift, nothing grand, just a gesture that said, I see you, I choose you. Wordless offerings had become their language. The dusty road stretched toward town, its memory of snow faded. There was a matter that needed tending. Sam saddled the horse, and Nahili stepped onto the porch. You are riding to town, she said. It was a statement. He nodded. They will have questions. Do you want me to stay behind? She asked, though her tone made it clear she was not afraid. Sam hesitated for a moment. I want you to do what you choose. She looked at the horse, then back at him. Then I choose to ride with you. They rode side by side, the gentle wind tugging at their coats. As they neared the town, Sam could feel the weight of eyes upon them. They dismounted in front of Mrs. Albright's store. She was already standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her gaze went from Nahili to Sam, then to the distance, as if trying to fit the pieces into a story she could accept. Well, Mrs. Albright said, you brought her back then. Sam met her stare. She is not cargo. Nahili stepped forward before Sam could say more. Her voice was calm, but her words were sharp. I am not an arrangement. I am a woman who has chosen. Mrs. Albright blinked. Something in her bristled. Inside the store, a silence spread like ink in water. Sam kept his chin up. He did not need to look at Nahili. Her presence steadied him like the earth beneath his feet. Before they left, Sam said, his voice quiet, but heard by every soul in the store, we will be married in the spring. A murmur ran through the room. Nahili did not flinch. She turned and walked out. They rode home slowly, the sun setting behind them in golden rust. That night, the fire burned, rich and warm. Nahili sat at the table, her fingers braiding a new length of leather. Sam watched her from his chair. Do you miss them? He asked. She looked up. My people, he nodded. She thought for a while. Some of them. I miss who I was before they told me what I had to be. Sam stared into the fire. I know that feeling. She stood, crossed to him, and placed her hands on either side of his face. You never told me what you wanted. He looked up at her, his eyes lined but steady. I wanted peace. But I did not know what that meant until you walked through my door. She kissed him then, a kiss that settled, anchoring something that had floated for too long. A kiss that made room for the silence that followed. In the days that followed, they built a new rhythm. He repaired the fence with her beside him, their hands often brushing. He taught her to shoot a rifle. She taught him how to read the tracks of a fox. One evening, Sam sat by the fire with a cradle in his lap. He was carving it slowly, carefully, the way he once had for a child who never opened her eyes. This one was different. It was for the life growing in the curve of Nahili's belly. She leaned against the doorway, watching him work, her hands cradling herself like a prayer already answered. "You are different," she said. He looked up. "How so?" "Lighter. As if your shadow does not cling so hard." He chuckled softly. "Perhaps. That is because I no longer carry it alone." Outside, the stars spilled across the prairie sky, fierce and infinite. The fire crackled, the baby kicked, the man carved, and the woman who had been hunted, silenced and claimed now stood unbroken, beloved, chosen. In the stillness between breaths, Sam whispered, "Some stories begin with fire, some with ash. But ours began the moment I opened that door." Nahili crossed to him, placed her hand over his heart, and whispered back, "And I walked in." And so they remained, two quiet souls who had once lived in storms, now wrapped in firelight and building a life not of conquest, but of consent, not of rescue, but of recognition. They had endured the long ride. They had made it home.